Let's take a look at Guitar Care 101. What I want to discuss with you here is the basics that you really need to know in order to move your guitar from here to there. So you're playing chords, you're playing some melodies, or you're doing some exercises now, and you want to maybe go to a friend's house or that sort of thing, but you want to move the guitar, and you want to take, whether you're moving it or not, here's some bits and pieces that we really need to know about, okay? Now we'll discuss more of this in detail later on, but the two things that are going to affect your guitar the most are temperature and humidity, and probably in that order. So, you know, as a guitar heats up or as it cools down, so extreme temperatures of either, it's going to expand or contract. And if it goes too long like that, there can be problems. With humidity, same thing, or similar things happen in that they can expand or contract. But then also what happens is the wood, the fibers in the wood, especially with acoustic guitars, electrics seem to be less susceptible than acoustics, but same thing with both guitars is that the wood can become too dry in places where there's just not enough humidity. And in tropical regions or where there's more humidity, you can have too much humidity to where the guitar just kind of starts sounding dull. But more often, having it too dry is going to affect the guitar negatively. Okay, but there is kind of a range, if you will. And really the range that you can think about in regards to temperature and regards to humidity has a lot to do with the way that you feel. Okay, so if you feel, gosh, it's just way too hot in here, it's going to be too hot for your guitar. If it's too cold, it's too cold for your guitar. Now, there tends to be a little bit of wiggle room in regards to that, but you know, between 70 and 75 degrees is like optimal temperature for your guitar, and a humidity range of probably 45 to 55 is a great humidity range. Now, depending on the guitar and depending on some other variables, we can go outside of those, but that's where we want to try to keep the equilibrium, okay? So what I mean by this is, here I'm in Nashville, and during the summer it gets warm, but our house never goes above 80 even on the hottest of days, so I'm still in a good range there. I have studios here in the basement, and in the winter, if it were to get too cold, I would need to turn on the air to make sure that they don't get too cold, or bring them upstairs. Now, what also happens in the winter is that things get very dry. And so sometimes in my home in the winter, it can get down into the teens in regards to humidity. Very bad for guitars, especially for an extended period of time. Now, if you were to have a dip where the humidity would dip for, you know, a couple days or so, you would be fine. But for long periods of time, for weeks, months, years at a time, very, very destructive to a guitar, because what happens is everything starts shrinking. This guitar is glued, all sorts of glue, putting it together, and what happens is over the years and over the months, as that glue is being stressed, things start breaking off. I've seen bridges break off, I've seen necks warp, I've seen the backs of guitars bow, where they're just literally, there's like a bow on the back to where it warps up. Just all sorts of problems all over the guitar if it gets too hot, if it gets too cold, if it's too humid or too dry. My guitar luthier, or I should say my guitar repair person, he told me a story of when he was playing a gig, and it was someplace up north, and he had a Fender Stratocaster, and I think it was I don't know, in the 50s or 60s, a very old Stratocaster that today would be worth a lot of money, you know, $20,000, $30,000. And he took that guitar out, and it was very, very cold, so they were driving around in a van, and he was worried about it, and he took it out and put it right in front of the heater, or the right in front of like a space heater. And what happened is the guitar just cracked all over the finish, just absolutely ruined the finish right away. In fact, he said as soon as he opened the case, it just just started cracking all about. Probably looked pretty cool at the time, but totally ruined a guitar that would be worth a lot of money today. So, you know, quick temperature changes are not good also, whether hot or cold. So if you're going from a hot temperature into a cold, you want to leave the guitar in the case, let it acclimate a little bit before you open the case. Okay, same thing with cold to the hot. But if you just keep it at a nice temperature, you're not going to have a problem. Okay. In regards to humidity, in the winter, I like to have some sort of humidifier going to pump some water into the air to keep the guitars hydrated, because if they get too dry, you can have problems again. In the rare occasion where you're living in a place where the humidity's high all the time, the caveat to that is, yes, a guitar can get too wet. It's rarer, more rare than having the guitar get too dry. But what happens is, if the guitar gets too wet, the tone seems to get affected. It gets dull sounding. So there's something to say about wood that's been aged. It gets old and it gets more porous. It gets more, it gets louder. It vibrates better. That's why folks like vintage guitars more. So you want to make sure that that you're keeping it in a good range. Now, these are just some basics to go by. You could delve in further with Google and you could really go down that rabbit trail. But if you keep the guitar in some basic temperatures that you're comfortable with, you're going to be fine. And same thing with humidity. It's helpful if you have, especially if you have an acoustic guitar and you live someplace that's, you know, kind of further up north. I mean, I'm in Nashville and we have dry humidity problems, okay? Dry problems here. Same thing out west. So if you're in a place where it's known to be extra dry or extra wet, you want to make sure that you go out and get yourself a meter that would read humidity and keep that in that range that I'm talking about. Try to keep it in that range. If you have a few days that dip or go up, that's okay. But you don't want to, for extended periods of time, you don't want to have that, okay? Same thing with temperature. You never want to leave a guitar in the car on a hot day, or even if it's a temperate day, if the windows are up. It's just like an animal, a dog or a child, or yourself. You don't want to stay in a car like that. Don't put your guitar or, you know, in a car like that, okay? You want to make sure you take it out, bring it in the air conditioning. It's going to help out a lot. If you have a guitar case, keep it in the guitar case when you're moving from here to there. If you only have a gig bag, that's okay. Just make sure that gig bag is, you know, you got to think that even though it's in the gig bag, if things are hitting it, it's probably hitting the guitar. It's impacting the guitar in some way. So if a guitar is in a gig bag and it falls over onto the headstock, you can still knock these tuners right off of the guitar, okay? And that's no fun to have a guitar with less than 6 strings, okay? Make sure that you keep it in the case when going from here to there. If you have a guitar stand, great. If you don't have one, get one. Or keep the guitar in the case, which is kind of a bit of a pain because you're always having to open up the case. So a good guitar stand is nice because it keeps your guitar at such an angle that it's not stressing the guitar in any way, and also it's going to keep the guitar from getting bumped, knocked down, that sort of thing. If you have small children in the house, they love twisting the tuning pegs, they love messing with guitars. So put it in the case then, or keep it out of reach of the children if they're going to mess with your guitar. It's no fun to have a guitar thrown over, especially if it's an expensive guitar and it was probably done by a mistake. Make sure that doesn't happen, okay? Now we're going to get into this further as we go through the course as far as guitar care. We're going to talk about some other things. But suffice to say, for right now, if you do these few things, think of temperature, humidity, and keeping a case around the guitar when it's needed. If you think about those 3 things all the time, you're going to take care of about 95% of the things that can go wrong with your guitar. And we'll address some of the other things as we go further into the course. All right, let's keep going.